All right, guys, today we're going to go a little bit back in time. We're going to go a little bit back in time, a little throwback. Got a couple messages about high water. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, you want to check out that newsletter. I'll put it in the description. We're going to go throwback baits because as we've progressed with all these buyouts and acquisitions in the fishing community space, a lot of baits have fallen through the cracks, right? Companies get absorbed. We move on. New baits, new innovations, the latest, hottest bait from the Elite Series that, the latest buzz bait from the Elite Series that's new and creates all this kind of craze. And we tend to forget that a lot of those baits of yesteryear threw down, man, actually caught fish. And so now in your fisheries, you've got generations of bass that have never seen these baits, or I've seen them very, very limited. Because some of them are still in production today. They're just not you're not finding them on YouTube. You're not finding them on Bassmaster or MLF Live or whatever like that. And I think that one of the biggest throwbacks, if you're a smallie chaser, okay, but also for largemouth, because these baits have caught largemouth bass too. Everybody seems to think that we have to go bigger, that we've had to go bigger. And we've been on that trajectory where we've gone from baits just getting bigger, swim baits getting bigger. I'm going to do another video on the swim bait side to show you the differences of what's happening right now with actually swim baits finally being downsized to smaller 3.5 to 4 inch hard swim baits. Okay, remember the swim bait craze was 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 inches, right? And everybody got hooked on that craze. But eventually, things come around, and a lot of times in a lot of places in the country, a lot of the baits that get pushed don't really catch black bass. They don't catch fish for you because they're not translatable to the forage species that you may have in the Northeast or the upper Midwest, right? Not all the baits that you see on YouTube in Texas are going to catch particularly in your pond or your river or your lake or reservoir. They're just not. But one of the throwback baits that seems to catch fish everywhere, that you now can use as a baseline for modifications for all these baits. And this is something that I found out happenstance, right? Very familiar with these baits back in the 70s and especially the 80s, working in a tackle shop as a teenager. They were extremely popular back then. I love to do these old school throwback videos. I got a lot of responses to the Okeechobee rig video I did. A lot of people hated that video because that's still been a secret sauce for a lot of people, especially where I live. But it's all good. And of course, when you're talking throwback baits, you cannot not have in the conversation probably the king. And I mean the king. Most of you are probably familiar with all the TV of Bill Dance and Roland Martin, right? But before that, there was a gentleman called Virgil Ward, okay? And the old timers used to talk about Virgil Ward in the late 70s and 80s when I was a kid all the time. All the time. And it was he was it, okay, back then. And of course, Virgil Ward, most people will not be familiar with by name unless you are really, really dialed into fishing history and you're just a geek and you geek on this stuff. But I guarantee you are familiar with one of his baits that became probably the most notorious of his baits. But he actually is the founding father of a lot of baits that went on by other brands. And that bait is, in fact, the Beetle Spin. It is, in fact, the Beetle Spin. Now, we all know, most people today refer to the Beetle Spin as Johnson, from Johnson. But the Beetle Spin was created by Virgil Ward in the late 1940s. Early 50s, people started talking about the Beetle Spin. Okay? It was the Bass Buster Lure Company, which was part of the Ward Company. Okay? Where all the baits. This guy was the front mover of the marabou jig. Okay, which is crazy in the Northeast, right? And the upper Midwest, right? Hair jigs, okay, crazy. He had a feather tail jig, okay. So now you got all the feathers and all that stuff on treble hooks, right? Where did all that come from? Came from this guy's mind and little shop of where he created all these baits. And the Beetle Spin just happened to be the one that really, really took off, I want to say nationally, right? And ultimately it would be acquired by Johnson, I want to say in the 1960s. Sometime in the 1960s, okay? Back then, Johnson had Johnson. Today, presently, it's Johnson Outdoors, but Johnson Outdoors no longer owns Johnson, the fishing products division, okay? That was acquired by Pure Fishing in 2000, so 25 years ago. So a lot of people think that the Johnson baits are still part of Johnson Outdoors, Minn Kota, Cannon, a whole bunch of other brands, Old Town Kayaks, things like that. But it's not. It's actually part of Pure Fishing. Okay? Now, another one of the throwback baits that a lot of people, you still can find some of these, which is kind of crazy to me, is the Scorpion. Okay? The Scorpion spinnerbait was also another one of Virgil Ward's big time sellers in different parts of the country. That's not, I don't think that was part of the, it's kind of transition. But I will tell you the closest thing I think that's out there to the Scorpion spinnerbait that's in the market, at big box stores is probably your Strike King. Okay, your micro spinnerbait. Okay, these are all micro downsize kind of formats, right? Which we have gotten away from the last 20 years, right? We've gone bigger, big chatterbaits, big swim baits, okay? Bigger soft plastics. Soft plastics have gone from the traditional 3-inch, 3 to 4 inch, all the way to 8-inch and 10-inch now. Soft plastic pours, right? Okay, that's probably close. You also got the Bass Pro Shop is another one that's probably closer to it than the Strike King, to what the Scorpion was. Really small, okay, mostly Colorado blades tend to be. That's another innovative thing with Virgil Ward was the blades that he was putting on. Now, most people probably don't know this fact about Virgil Ward, and something that's kind of actually stood the test of time, and that's the weed guard on jigs. That fiber-like weed guard that's standard on most jigs today, swim jigs and everything, that's patented by Virgil Ward. Okay? Like, it's absolutely crazy how many things today that we can pick apart in different baits. Hard to believe he didn't come up with the chatterbait. But again, things have happened, and chatterbait is now off patent, by the way. So you're going to see a lot more chatterbait style baits now, continuing the pendulum of innovation now in and around that kind of technology. But the Beetle Spin has always been, a lot of times it's been an entry-level bait when you're a kid, right? Like your dad, your granddad, your brother would tie all, give you the Beetle Spin. Like you could starter bait for everybody, right? Mostly panfish, crappie, but not anymore. And I think it's in large part because so many, in my case, smallmouth bass, just don't see the Beetle Spin, or what I'm going to talk about, Beetle Spin modifications. They don't see these presentations every day. And they're absolute crushers, okay? Especially in river systems. Because they do a lot of different things, and they're still small and compact. So, you got to remember, though, the Beetle Spin is still with us because it was acquired and it's been backed. It's got a big company like Pure Fishing. It's on the store shelves. People don't talk about it a lot, but it's still there. It's still bought by a lot of people, like I said, who fish for crappie and panfish and things like that. It's mostly for kids that are going to choose a simple bait. I remember as a kid going down to the James River, stopping by, picking up a bunch, and at the shop that I worked at, and going right down to the river, off Forest Hill Avenue, right down to the James River, which is now James River Park, and all that stuff, and basically just catching smallies all day long with a Beetle Spin. It's very, very simple. It's small. It's compact. It matches the forage. Probably the number one complaint you'll hear from most people about the Beetle Spin is the colors. The colors really aren't what really people are looking for. Okay? And I've always wondered this about Pure Fishing. Like, that they haven't kind of realized that, like, there's an opportunity. If you go back and you look at the colors, most people in most stores around the country, there may be 3 or 4 colors for Beetle spins that are carried on their shelves. Back when I was working at a tackle shop, 14, 15, 16 years old, okay, there were dozens. Go back and look at the old catalogs for Bassmaster and see all the color variations that came with the Beetle spin. Okay? And this size, as it translated to bass, really became the precursor to the Ned rig. It really did. These small, and then what you had was, you basically had your soft plastic with your jig, right? And he started that by putting it on a spin, but with a jig, right? It's an inline spinner, but really it's a jig spinner, okay? And so a lot of people felt like these are too small, okay? That the length of these and the size of these are too small for largemouth bass. So people pass them by, okay? They'll go and pick up a bag of 5 or 8 soft plastics, okay? And then they'll put that on a hook, or they'll put that on a jig, or whatever, and hence you get the Ned rig, right? Okay, as opposed to going with this size, which people had the mentality that it didn't catch big bass, although it does. Okay, so those are like the 2 big criticisms for the Beetle spin, was the color, and then again the size. Okay, in terms of that, but with rising water like today, like this week, again, my river is rising, going to be 9 feet by probably Thursday. Then it's going to fall back down. In these rising river and receding river situations, the inline spinner is an optimal bait. Now, most people probably have, that I know of, probably have a Beetle spin or something similar in their wade bag, right? Guys going wade fishing love the Beetle spin, okay? Because it's small, it's compact, it's light. You can use light line, you're using light tackle, you're wade fishing, okay? And then some guys have transitioned to this kind of thing to like I said, the Kitech variety, okay? Like a larger swim, paddle tail, boot tail swim bait, 3.3, 3.8, maybe a 4.2, whatever, okay? And, you know, an EYG hook, a weighted hook, or whatever. But what they're sleeping on is putting a spinner on it, modifying it traditionally like a Beetle spin. And people are like, how do you do that, Jay? Well, the reality of it is these spinners are available, okay? You can get them online, or you can go right down to Bass Pro Shops. Go on, I don't know how they have these aisles labeled, but there's an accessories and stuff like that in the crappie and the panfish area of most Bass Pro Shops, between that and the bass area, where you can find a lot of the modification things that you can put along with obviously the weights and everything like that. And what I found at Bass Pro Shops that is the easiest thing is it's readily accessible, because I got multiple Bass Pro Shops in my area that I can get them to. You certainly can order them online, probably in bigger packs, probably save a couple bucks that way, is jig spinners, okay? These both came from Bass Pro Shops. So I got a gold, hammered gold, okay? And I've got the Beetle Spin traditional silver, okay? So look at that. A little bit bigger than the blade. And online you can get the smaller ones. This was the smallest one I've seen at Bass Pro Shops. Okay? All right. And they're classified as under the walleye angler jig spinner. Okay? And I have caught walleye with these. All right? So I kind of get it. But if you're catching walleye with these, you're also catching smallmouth bass in the Upper Potomac, the Monocacy, the Susquehanna, the Allegheny, the James River, etc., etc., etc. Okay? For smallmouth, because they absolutely love it. All right? And all you really need to do is very simply modify your Ned rig. Okay? Modify your Ned rig. You can take your trailer's a grub trailer. Like I said before, you can do it with straight tail worm. Okay? You just modify your Ned rig. So if your Ned rig is not working, okay, and they're not on the bottom, right? Maybe they're suspended a little bit. Maybe they don't, but you want to change up that presentation. This is kind of like one of the most effective things that you can do. And a lot of people don't transition from like bank fishing, wade fishing tackle to kayak tackle and then to boat tackle. Like for some reason they think that if they're fishing from a kayak or a boat, that they shouldn't be fishing with the Beetle spin. 100% incorrect. Okay? Depending on your water conditions, your river conditions, okay? In times when that water is rising and that time when that water is receding, okay, and the smallies have been pushed up into the banks, okay, they're going to chase, okay? And this offers you so much more flexibility, okay? First of all, you've got the weighted head. You can determine what size jig that you want to use, okay, which is going to affect your castability, your casting distance. If you want to be further back and you're going to lay that out in there, okay? Now, most people don't know this, okay? Bass Buster Lure Company also had a bait called the Chummin' Minnow, okay? And the thing that I remember about that bait is it was one of the only baits fully rigged during that time frame when I was a teenager at the tackle shop that was flavored. It was scented in the bait. And that was like the craze that people were talking about. Like, there weren't that many baits in the package on the shelf that had scent back then. There were some, but it wasn't a big craze. Like, like every brand was doing it, right? Okay? And they had the Chummin' Minnow, okay? And what the Chummin' Minnow is much larger format, a little bit heavier, and it was more like a minnow. So you can do it the same way, okay? You guys have got to be familiar with this. I'm going to be honest with you when I say this, full disclosure. I never caught a single fish with this bait. The Storm, okay? The Storm Wild Eye Swim Shad, okay? I never caught a single fish with this bait until I started presenting it with the spinner, the Beetle spin modification, okay? I don't know why that is. Fished it in the same areas without the spin, okay? I don't know why that is, okay? But what I do know is it absolutely works lakes, reservoirs, and rivers, especially if you have shad, okay? Very simple, throwing it in there. You don't have forward-facing sonar. Prime example. You do not have forward-facing sonar. Shad are busting up, okay? Throw this up in there. I don't know what else to tell you, okay? It just works, okay? And of course, I got a gold one on this, but you can opt for the silver. Now, one of the other modifications that I'm kind of been playing around with, okay, the last year, really since last fall, and it's beginning to work a lot more for me, okay? Like, doesn't work all the time. It's got to have, the conditions have to be what they are, and that is taking it and placing it with an underspin, okay? Placing it with an underspin. So you've got that underblade, and then you've got that top spin, okay? And it has been slowly. Now, this year, it's kind of like been a wash this spring for me, because we've had so much flooding and so much, I haven't really been able to get it dialed in. But when the rivers calm back down, when the rivers settle back in and stay for like a week or so, and they kind of stay normal poolish, and kind of like in that 3 to like 4 foot range, it's working, okay? There can be some twists. You got to make sure you make the right line choices, okay, when you're doing something like that, all right? But it's just another thing. And it's really just a play on one of the things Virgil Ward had back in the 1960s was he had a tandem spinner. And be honest with you, I have not seen this in 25 or 30 years. So I'm working with someone to kind of like figure out how we can get a tandem blade, okay? But basically back then they were Beetle spins with 2 tandem blades, okay? So think about it with 2 blades up top, okay? Instead of just 1. And they were in like limited production, I think, for Bass Buster Lure Company. They also had a twice as heavy, which was the Beetle spin, but it was a heavier jig head. Hook was bigger, and it was a heavier jig head. So you don't really see those anymore, unless you're going to an old school tackle shop that's got baits from like forever ago, which is always kind of cool to find. But Johnson is pretty much, as part of Pure Fishing, they pretty much stayed in this same, haven't really changed the design much at all. But this is why I think if you play around with it and do the modifications, okay, and do the modifications that are going to work for you, lake, reservoir, shad, shad spawn, right, that kind of thing. Take your Ned rig or micro jigs, anything like that you want to just create a different like presentation. You want some flash, okay? These are so effective. They're the right size, guys, for smallmouth. It's just a great feeding frenzy for smallmouth. And then, of course, try some new things. Try it with your underspin on top. Try it with some other baits that you have that, that they're your favorite baits, but they just don't seem to be working. Your jigs, especially. I've tried it with just a straight up paddle tail, okay? Straight up hook, paddle tail, and spin as well, and have gotten big. So it's really a combination of things. I think if you work out, you can modify. So just get an idea. You can pick up some Beetle spins, and you can use the spinner. You can use the spinner off a Beetle spin if you want. You can pick up Beetle spins and just change out the soft plastic on the Beetle spin. Go to a paddle tail, go to a split tail, whatever you want, a fluke. I mean, when these get all beat up on some of mine, I'll switch to like a Zoom Fluke Junior, something like that. That's like smaller but compact, but it'll work. That has a paddle tail. You don't need to do the paddle tail. Like I said, you can do the split tail. But there's just so many things you could do. But you don't even need to go that route if you can locate your spinners, because you can put these on any jig head that you want, and you just need to figure out which spinner, which blade you want to go with. The tandem blades, Colorado blades, I'm sure they got them in Indiana. You can just figure that stuff out and go from there. But this is really what what you can do when things get tough, when the bite gets tough, is baits that you typically get bit on, especially if they're the jig variety. Change it up a little bit, add the spinner to it, make it an inline spinner, okay? And see what happens, especially if they're not exactly on the bottom and they're somewhere in that water column, and they're going to be willing to chase a little bit, like during high water when they get pushed to the banks. This is what you're going to find is an easy modification that you can do. Very simple. Again, Johnson Beetle spin, pretty much find them at every single tackle shop, and then modify it, pick you up some sides, modify your Ned rig, start with the Ned rig, start there. Or your favorite weighted hook, and your favorite soft plastic, paddle tail swim bait. Start with that. See how it goes. Get back with me. Put your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you're willing to try this. Let me know if you're doing this. And what modifications you're doing. What changes you're making. I prefer to go a little lighter. Especially like when I'm wade fishing and things like that, or I'm tethering the kayak and I want to get out. Then I tend to go a little bit heavier if I'm in the current or a current seam, or if I want to get distance. But I always have these spinners with me so I can modify things, okay? Anytime I'm out on the water based on the conditions that you're seeing out on the water. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. I hope you take advantage of that modification, and just always shoot me a message. Let me know how you do. All right, guys.